You know, some monsters are just stories, things we tell our kids to make them behave. But every once in a while, a monster turns out to be real. Their crimes are so twisted, so horrifying, that they blur the line between fact and folklore. Today, we're diving into the story of a terrifying Spanish boogeyman, a story where myth and a shocking reality crashed into one another.
Picture it, the late 19th century. This is how the press was describing the terror that was stalking the countryside of Vitoria in northern Spain. They weren't just reporting on a criminal. No, they were describing a demon, a phantom with glowing eyes and the smell of sulfur, like something that had clawed its way straight out of hell.
And the name they gave this phantom, El Sacamantecas, which literally means the fat stealer. Now, this wasn't just some spooky nickname. It came from a very real and very grim folk belief at the time. Tuberculosis was devastating the country, and a grotesque superstition started to spread, that the fat from a healthy human being could be used to create a magical cure.
So you have this terrifying legend, right? It's the perfect storm of public fear and old folklore. But it was also the perfect cover, because while everyone was looking over their shoulder for a demon, the killer was just a man who lived right there among them, and in so many ways was chillingly, frighteningly ordinary. That man's name was Juan Díaz de Garayo. And the story of how his real-life crimes got tangled up with the myth of the Sacamantecas, well, that's where this story takes its darkest turn.
I mean, the gap between the myth and the reality here is just staggering. The legend was this demonic figure with a dark, magical mission. But the real killer, Garayo, he was a laborer, a man driven by petty rage and some truly sordid impulses. He wasn't killing people for magic potions. He was killing because of an argument over a few coins, or because of his own twisted, violent frustrations.
And this wasn't just a brief spree. Garayo's reign of terror went on for an entire decade. It started back in 1870 with the murder of a prostitute, and his victims were often these marginalized women, people whose disappearances, sadly, didn't set off a lot of alarm bells at first. After a few more attacks, there was this eerie 4-year silence. Then he came back in 1879 for one last brutal run that would finally get him caught. So you gotta ask yourself, how in the world do you catch a killer like this in the 1870s? Especially when you don't even have a word for what he is. The idea of a serial killer just didn't exist yet. The police were completely flying blind.
Right from the start, the investigation was a mess. Cops were looking for motives they knew, like robbery. These killings didn't fit. But there was this one constable, a guy named Pío Fernández de Pinedo, who just wouldn't let it go. He started piecing together all these little fragments, witness sightings, an old assault charge against Garayo, the fact that Garayo had suddenly skipped town. It was Pinedo's sharp memory and just pure dogged police work that broke the case wide open.
On September 21st, 1879, Pinedo spotted Garayo on the street and arrested him on the spot. And the terrifying monster, the Sacamantecas of legend? You'd think he'd be some tough nut to crack, right? Nope. Under interrogation, he just crumbled. In just a couple of sessions, the man who had terrorized an entire region for 10 years confessed to everything. Okay, so they've caught him. Case closed? Not even close. Now the real fight began, and it was a question that would make legal history in Spain. He admitted he did it, but was he responsible? Was he an evil man who chose to do these things? Or was he a sick man who couldn't stop himself?
This trial basically became a battleground for what we'd now call criminal psychology. On one side, you had this pioneering psychiatrist, Dr. Izquierdo. He argued Garayo was a moral imbecile, a product of a degenerate family, and not truly responsible. On the other side, the local doctors in Vitoria saw a cunning, wicked man who knew exactly what he was doing. It was a total clash of ideas, nature versus nurture, sickness versus sin, all playing out in a courtroom for the very first time.
And Garayo himself, his own words from the trial are just bone-chilling. A judge asks him if he feels any remorse. He just flatly says, "No, señor." But then when the judge asks if he even knows what remorse is, he says, "Yes, señor, I know that I have done wrong." That coldness, knowing it's wrong but not feeling it, is just, wow, is that evil or is that a broken mind?
And just when you think you have him figured out, get this. The guy who was supposedly a simple-minded imbecile, he taught himself how to read in prison in a month. He was also incredibly clever, figuring out how to get his clothes off while he was in shackles, or how to shave using a single matchstick. That's not the work of a man with no intelligence. To really get a sense of just how big a deal Garayo was at the time, It helps to look at his more famous, but no more brutal counterpart over in England. Yeah, let's put these two terrors side by side. Everybody knows Jack the Ripper, who terrified London in 1888. But look at the Sacamantecas. He was active for nearly a decade before the Ripper even started, he had more confirmed victims, and here's the kicker. Unlike the Ripper, he was actually caught. Spain had its own monster long before London's became a global phenomenon.
In the end, the court sided with the local doctors. Garayo was found sane, responsible, and was sentenced to death. And the public's mix of terror and fascination came to a head on May 11, 1881. On the day of his execution, an estimated 10,000 people gathered to watch the man they knew as the Sacamantecas die.
So Juan Díaz de Garayo, the man, was gone. But El Sacamantecas, the monster, he became immortal. See, he didn't set out to create a legend, but his real-world crimes were the perfect kindling for that fire of folklore. The name Sacamantecas lived on, becoming a go-to scary story, a name Spanish parents would use for generations to frighten their kids into behaving.
And all of this leaves us with one last really unsettling question, doesn't it? The story of the Sacamantecas shows this deep need we seem to have to invent supernatural reasons for horrors that are all too human. It's almost easier, isn't it, to believe in a fat-stealing demon than to accept that our neighbor, a coworker, just a regular man, could be capable of such absolute evil. Why is the reality of human monstrosities sometimes so much harder to face than any myth?